characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of your comments about the infamous crime lord. But before we get to any and all that, you can already head down to nominate and or vote for which character we do next. Just respond to my pinned comment below with a character name, or vote with a thumbs up if the one you'd like to see is already listed. Whatever single comment gets the most votes in the next 24 hours will be the winner and the character we do next. And so now on to the results for Jabba the Hutt, where we'll see that 24% of voters gave him an A, 46% then went with a B, 23% thought he was more of a C tier character, which then left 4% to give him a D, and a final 3% of voters to give him an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Jabba ends up with an average score of 3.84, which puts him into a tie for 36th place overall with Asajj Ventress, but with our tiebreaker being percentage of voters that gave the character an A, that then means Jabba gets the nod over Ventress. And before moving on to your comments, let me once again just take a moment to say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these or any of my videos. It is all greatly appreciated. And also a big thank you to everyone who supports this channel over on Patreon. And now let's kick things off, as always, with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Dylan M, who said, "One of the most iconic characters that doesn't have a fleshed out backstory." And though yes, Jabba does have a much more fleshed out backstory in the expanded universe, like pretty much all characters do, the point here is that in the movies, of course, very little is known about him or his motives, and yet he has still become a very iconic or well-known and appreciated character or villain, which is because he's exactly what the films, especially Return of the Jedi, need him to be, no more, no less. And as I've discussed before, and as Tristan Lampert points out in this comment, you don't always need an elaborate and complex backstory or hours upon hours of screen time to be a great character. Though obviously it's important, a well-crafted story is not just one with brilliantly written characters, it's one that knows how to use characters in the right way to weave an interesting and engaging and memorable narrative. And a story, again, even one with fantastic and well fleshed out characters, can quickly get bogged down with unnecessary details if you're not careful, and oftentimes even just a line or two can tell you everything you might need to know about a character and set the stage for a great encounter. For example, and mind you, we've heard other things about Jabba along the way in the original trilogy, but even if you, for whatever reason, start with Return of the Jedi and you've never heard Jabba's name uttered before, 3PO has a great line that he says to R2 when they're on the way to Jabba's palace, where he says, "If I told you half the things I've heard about this Jabba the Hutt, you'd probably short circuit." And that right there tells you not only is he infamous, that there are stories out there, or plenty of them out there about Jabba, but that he's frightening, he's not a good person, and he should be feared, that they should be careful in how they proceed here, or they too will end up just another horrifying story for others to hear about. That line, whether you realize it or not in the moment, just mentally sets the stage for our encounter with Jabba. Alright, and next up here we have this comment from Eli Vanto, who said, "Despite his relatively short screen time, Jabba is unforgettable. His appearance, his laugh, his eating habits, they are ingrained into me forever. He was this mysterious gangster that Han feared, and despite his poor portrayal in anything but Return of the Jedi, he will always be one of my favorite baddies. A." And this is another key factor as to why Jabba can be considered a great character. The presentation and or performance itself is memorable. He's unlike anything we'd seen before at the time. And we can infer so much just by the way he looks and behaves or interacts with others, that he's quick to feed anyone he's not happy with to his pet Rancor, that he likes to make a spectacle out of executing people who oppose him. We may not know his backstory, but we certainly know what this character is all about and what he's willing to do to those he doesn't like. Next up here we have this comment from Neketsa Anera, probably saying that wrong, so my apologies. Anyway, they had this to say. He's fun, iconic, hateable, and an actual threat to our heroes. He also has a great build-up, being referenced in A New Hope and in The Empire Strikes Back, before finally being shown in Return of the Jedi. Also then this comment from Even More, who said, Jabba the Hutt isn't exactly the most fleshed out, metaphorically speaking, not literally, of villains, but he was pretty much what he needed to be. He was a distant looming threat over Han Solo's head for most of A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. His appearance in Return of the Jedi showed him as the literal vile slug that he is, before he is dispatched by a woman he foolishly chose to humiliate rather than either immediately kill or use as a bargaining chip. Too bad Lucas decided to reinsert his scene with Han in A New Hope, though. He worked better in that film without being seen. And that is another thing about Jabba the Hutt before the special editions or the prequels. He is mentioned in the previous two films before Return of the Jedi without ever being seen, and he is this constant, ever-looming shadow or threat over Han Solo, and he works really, really well that way. And though I don't have any real issue with him being in the Phantom Menace or Clone Wars, though I wouldn't have chosen the episodes with him and his son Rada the Hutt for Clone Wars movie, I'm not sure Lucas really needed to go back and put him into A New Hope to complete the scene that got left out on the cutting room floor for one reason only back then, that being money. It would have cost just way too much to complete that scene. Lucas's original plan was to use claymation and then to superimpose Jabba in there, and I'm really glad that didn't happen because I'm not so sure how good that would have turned out. And Lucas even wanted to include it so badly that he asked the studio for an extra $80,000 to complete the scene, but they only gave him half the money he asked for, which he ended up then using on the cantina scene to include more creatures in the background, and so I'm kind of thankful for the way that all turned out. Even still, no, I don't hate Jabba being added into A New Hope. I don't think it was needed or necessary or anything like that, but I'd seen the original version of the film so many times that it's just something that's there, I guess. Just like a lot of the little CGI changes or details that weren't in the original, obviously. They don't really bother me because I can still see the movie without them in a way. Though I do think Commander Colt makes a pretty good point in their comment here when he says Jabba doesn't feel like the type of character to personally go to a spaceport to talk to Han, not unless he was maybe going to turn it into a spectacle of some kind by executing him to make some kind of point about what happens to those who don't pay him. Okay, and moving on now, we have this comment from Jonathan Anderson who said, B, such a great side character and villain, loved the design and how much work went into bringing Jabba to life. Also, you know how threatening a villain is when he's Boba Fett's boss and has a giant monster right underneath him. We also have this comment from Apex Underdog who said, Jabba may be the best practical effect in the whole series with the possible exception of Yoda, and that has to be worth at least a B for me. Then there's this one from Tyler Prather who said, that giant puppet in Return of the Jedi is still impressive. It's amazing that I never consciously think that's not real. Props to all the hard work that was put into that thing. We also have this comment from Doug Rotundi who said, the epitome of iconic character design, A+. I remember that it took 6 or 7 puppeteers to bring him to life. Perfect example of how dedicated the original films were to their artistry. And yeah, incredibly enough, it took 6 people to bring Jabba to life in Return of the Jedi, 3 inside of him, 1 underneath him, and then 2 that used remote controls to operate the eyes, and I know which of those jobs I'd prefer. And the result is something that in the film looks like a real giant space slug. And even these days, there's still something about practical effects that CGI struggles to capture. A certain presence, I guess you could call it. You can just tell, or your brain can just tell that Jabba is actually there because he is actually there. But with a lot of CGI, even though it looks incredible, don't get me wrong, most of the time you can still tell it's not actually there, especially when it comes to CGI characters, I think. Because yes, a lot of the time backgrounds or just small, not front and center effects look fantastic. You don't even really think about them. They just blend in and it's perfect. But anything the camera really focuses on still usually has a look about it that just feels off. Alright, and now let's get to just a few final comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from Al Delta 1 who said, he's a perfect side villain, iconic looking and driven by very basic street level villainy. Then this one from Austin Shaw who said, it's a D for me. Jabba only ever seems to be a plot device, not a real character. He is there to provide something for the plot, nothing more. Then this one from Charlie Maloney who said, finally, how has it taken this long to cover one of the original and incredibly iconic villains of Star Wars? Jabba and his bounty hunters are an incredibly iconic part of Star Wars that added to the Wild West feel of the Outer Rim. Republic or Empire, everyone knows who has the real power, and it's the Hutt clan. Next up here, this one from Ethan Blake who said, Jabba in Legends and in canon are almost two different beasts. In Legends, we see him as the true crime boss, whereas in canon he is shown more as the figurehead of the Hutts. Solid B tier for me. Also, this one from James Kingsbury, who said, "The opening act of Return of the Jedi is one of my favorites in Star Wars, and it's made satisfying by Jabba being a worthy adversary. There were no plot hole exhaust pipes, no mind tricks would work on him, defeating him required Luke to be at the top of his game. Jabba was a classic gangster, balancing practicality and over-the-topness, like having a huge monster eat people that got on his bad side, or having an R2 unit serving cocktails." Moving on then, this comment from John Connor, who said, "I give him a B. I think he's a cool character, however, I wish that Anakin had more interactions with him. I think it could have been interesting to see that." Then there's this one from Mood Cap, who said, "He's a B and there's nothing wrong with that. Not every villain needs to reinvent the wheel. It's okay to have simplistic villains." Also, we have this one from Nathan Wharton, who said, "Jabba the Hutt is easily one of the most infamous crime bosses out there. He's super iconic, he inspired Pizza the Hutt, and he manages to inspire actual fear even though he's a giant blob of slime. For what he is, I give him an A." And finally here, this comment from ABXX2011, who said, "He's interesting and unique. He has presence. He has a cool name. He has a great laugh. He can't be manipulated by Jedi mind tricks. He lives a life to be envied, a non-stop party of music, beautiful women, and Rancor feedings. A for awesome." Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of Jabba the Hutt, or what you think of what I or anyone else had to say about him here in this video. Or you can feel free to nominate and or vote for which character we do next. Whatever the case may be, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.